try to eat beforehand, I actually get sick. Because my body's not used to eating. Is Tim trying to get started on how we things up?
No, I'm not. I'm not ready yet.
Oh, yeah.
All right. This time, I want you to look at it. I'm not going to hit it this time. Can you see me? Am I okay? All right. All right. I want to go over some things with you tonight. I read another book. Well, I read The Glucose Revolution, which is good. And I read another book called Insulin Resistance. And I'll have a picture of both of them on the screen coming up. But I've taken some of the ideas from both books, put them together, and came up with about 7 ways to disarm carbs. That's what I called it, disarm them, or carb blockers, to cut back on the effects of carbohydrates that shoot your blood sugars up. And one of the ways to do that is just don't eat any carbs. But who wants to do that? But anyway, eat less carbs would be another way. Okay, anyway, so we're going to get started now. And it looks pretty good, doesn't it, Mary? Oh, look pretty good? Okay. I'm just talking about on the screen of the little. Okay, here we go. So the parrot was curious about the camera in Brazil. And just like we should be curious about how we eat for diabetes control. Today we'll explore several ideas about disarming carbohydrates that can increase blood sugars and stimulate insulin production. And we'll look at 7 helpful strategies for eating, like the sequence of eating various foods such as vegetables, protein, and carbs. And I'm glad that guy's really curious, aren't you? Just like you are, really curious. We're going to start off with attitude. A doctor's 17-year-old son was recovering from cancer surgery, and the surgeon came into the room the next day after the surgery, and in the patient's presence, bluntly told his father that he would expect his son only to live a few more days. Well, the father was shocked, not just by the catastrophic news, but by the fact that the surgeon had no hesitation in delivering the verdict right in front of his son. I followed the surgeon out of the room, and as a fellow physician, berated him for his reprehensible conduct. He was surprised by my anger and defended himself. And he said doctors must be honest and not deceive patients. The father wanted him to consult with him first before deciding what he should say. So he went back into the son's room, and he told the son what he had done, that he had chewed out the surgeon, and told him that he had known many patients who had made comebacks. And his son believed him. He sailed through the next several days. His cancer's in remission, and the surgery was 4 years ago. Do doctors know all? No, not with those kind of procrastination, those kind of thoughts. Now, what is most striking about these cases? Cancer, multiple sclerosis, lupus, diabetes, heart disease, Parkinson's, is that the illness worsened coincident to the diagnosis. And why should these patients experience a severe downturn in their condition and coincident with the diagnosis? Why should bad news make them worse? Was it possible that the moment they had a label to attach to their symptoms, the ability of their bodies to respond to a challenge was significantly diminished? That could be. Well, this woman was in her upper 70s, and she was told by a physician with the results in hand that she had cancer. And he said it was terminal and gave her 4 to 6 months. And I looked him in the eye. God could give me 4 months to live, but not another human being. And she after the diagnosis there, she was still living 6 years later. Attitude makes the difference. And so here we have the way of wisdom. And it happens over and over. Yesterday, for example, I followed my prescribed meal plan almost perfectly, and I even skipped dinner. And so I woke up this morning and my blood sugar was 300. This is ridiculous. Why should I even try? Well, stop putting yourself down so much. You need to be talking with more pleasant language, like pleasant words are like honey. They are sweet to the spirit and they bring healing to the body. Change your wording. Here's another one. I'm ashamed and embarrassed that I have diabetes. And I got myself into this predicament and I can't seem to do anything right to get out of it. This is so discouraging. Well, I think the kind of language we need to be telling ourselves is this: anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. We need a kind word, don't we? Now, I want to give you a story of someone who had the right kind of attitude. Her name is Elizabeth Hughes. And I'm going to start off with a little video. And then I'm going to go over her story a little bit. And then I'm going to get into these 7 ways for us.
Anyone who has ever known someone suffering from cancer knows the ups and downs of the disease. One day you can have so much hope, yet the next day it seems hopeless. This is a story I tell to our students. It is a story to motivate them, to let them know that they can solve the biggest problems of our times. It is also a story of hope, a story that suggests we should never give up, no matter how hopeless it seems. The story begins here with Charles Evan Hughes. This is a photo of Charles Hughes with his family in 1916 when he was running for President of the United States. Hughes was one of the leading political figures of his time. He had served as governor of New York and then been appointed to the United States Supreme Court. He resigned from the court in 1916 to run for president. He ended up losing to Woodrow Wilson in a close race. But this story is not about Charles Hughes. It is about his youngest daughter, Elizabeth. She was born in 1907 while her father was the governor of New York. When Elizabeth was 12 years old, something started to go wrong. She developed a voracious thirst and would drink as much as half a gallon of water at a sitting. She grew weaker. After several months, it was clear that she had developed the incurable disease of diabetes mellitus. Her outlook was bleak. Most children would die within months of developing diabetes. Medical research had determined that diabetes was caused by a failure in the pancreas. Early attempts to treat the disease by grinding up animal pancreases and injecting pancreatic extract had failed. The problem was that part of the pancreas produced external secretions. Now we call these proteases. These external secretions destroyed the internal secretions, now known as insulin. No one knew how to separate the external secretions from the internal secretions. Elizabeth's father was a powerful and influential man who sought the advice of the leading physicians of his time. Based upon their advice, Elizabeth was brought to a clinic in Morristown, New Jersey, run by Dr. Frederick Allen. The doctor was famous for his advocacy of treating diabetic patients with a starvation diet. Dr. Allen had shown that he could extend the life of a diabetic patient for several years by limiting their diet. When Elizabeth first went to see Dr. Allen in the spring of 1919, she was nearly 5 feet tall, but only weighed 75 pounds. Dr. Allen prescribed a carbohydrate-free diet with only about 500 calories per day. He sought to bring her weight down to the low 60s. If the disease were left untreated, Elizabeth probably would have died during the summer of 1919. The best she could hope for under Dr. Allen's treatment would be a slow, withering life, probably dying from starvation in another 3 years. In the summer of 1920, while Elizabeth was suffering through her starvation diet, a 29-year-old surgeon, Frederick Banting, was struggling to start a medical practice in London, Ontario. In his first month of business, he had seen one patient and earned $4. Dr. Banting had plenty of free time on his hands. The free time was making him miserable. He thought he was a failure on the business side of being a doctor. He had to take a part-time job at the local university that fall to help pay the bills. It paid $2 per hour. One night, after preparing a lecture on carbohydrate metabolism and its relationship to the pancreas, he picked up the latest copy of a medical journal and read this article. It was October 30th, 1920. Later, he described that night this way. It was one of those nights when I was disturbed and could not sleep. I thought about the lecture and about the article, and I thought about my miseries and how I would like to get out of debt and away from worry. Finally, about 2 in the morning, after the lecture and the article had been chasing each other in my mind for some time, the idea occurred to me that by the experimental ligation of the duct and subsequent degeneration of a portion of the pancreas, that one might obtain the internal secretion free from the external secretion. I got up and wrote down the idea and spent most of the night thinking about it. A week later, he went to see an expert in diabetes, J.J.R. McLeod, who was a professor of physiology at the University of Toronto. Banting proposed a method of treating diabetes. McLeod thought that Banting was naive. He told Banting that many scientists had devoted years of their life to studying diabetes without significant progress. But Banting was persistent. McLeod suggested that the approach was doomed to fail, but conceded it was original. They made arrangements, and Banting came to the University of Toronto for the summer of 1921 to perform the experiments. During that summer, Banting worked with an assistant, Charles Best. They experimentally induced diabetes in dogs, then tried to cure the diabetes with extract from other pancreases. Through his persistence, Banting was wildly successful. Before the end of the summer in 1921, he had shown that he could keep alive diabetic animals with his extract. McLeod named the extract insulin. They began purifying and bottling it. On January 23, 1922, they performed the first human injections. And it was just in time. By August 1922, Elizabeth Hughes was close to death. Her family got her an appointment with Dr. Banting, and she first saw him on August 15, 1922, 3 days before her 15th birthday. When Dr. Banting examined her, he noted that she was extremely emaciated. She only weighed 45 pounds. She had lost nearly half her weight in the last 3 years. Her skin was dried and scaly, her hair brittle and thin. She was so weak, she could barely walk. Banting immediately administered insulin, put Elizabeth on a 2,500 calories per day diet. Elizabeth rapidly gained weight. This was the first public evidence about the miraculous effects insulin had on diabetes. It had taken Elizabeth from her deathbed to a normal life within a month. This brought about a crisis. There was simply not enough insulin to meet the demand. Banting, McLeod, and the University of Toronto worked with Eli Lilly and Company to develop a large-scale process for the production of insulin. Eli Lilly used pig pancreas that could be cheaply acquired from slaughterhouses to develop the first commercial product. The commercial insulin was called Iletin and sold by Lilly. By October 1923, they had enough insulin for everyone who needed it. Banting and the Eli Lilly Company had saved the lives of thousands who were on their deathbed. Elizabeth Hughes grew up, graduated from college, got married, had 3 children. She even started the Supreme Court Historical Society. She lived 58 years longer than expected, thanks to Frederick Banting's relentless pursuit of a dream. Banting and McLeod received the 1923 Nobel Prize for this work. Tragically, Banting died in a plane crash while he was serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was 49. He is considered one of the greatest Canadians to ever live. I hope to retell this story someday soon. It will be about a metastatic cancer patient and one of you.
I don't even know if you could hear that. Could you hear it? Anyone hear it? Barely. Okay. Well, I got it on my mic, and it'll be well recorded, so I'll send you out a little video of it on your phone, okay? So you can watch. But she lived 58 more years after she received insulin. She got on a 2,500 calorie diet. She gained a lot of weight within a month. And see, that's a wonder. For people with type 1 diabetes like me, it's a savior, really, when you think about insulin. But you've got to be careful with insulin when it comes to type 2. I mean, it's very important still, but you can end up with too much of it. And that's where the problem is. And so, economic status had nothing to do with whether she received or was diagnosed with diabetes or not. And Charles Hughes was the former governor of New York. He ran for president against Wilson. He was a Supreme Court justice. He ended up being in the Harding administration, the United States Secretary of State. But his daughter still came down with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, when she was about 11. And this is her. They were able to hire a nurse from the Joslin Clinic in Boston, Elliot Joslin. He trained her. She came down and she worked with that family, with Elizabeth, for the coming years, 4 years that is. Of course, they moved to Washington, D.C. because he was Secretary of State during that time. And the time was so stressful that she had a hard time keeping control of her blood sugars. And the only way they could check that was through the urine, if you had spillover into your urine. And she was having difficulty, so they decided to send her to the island of Bermuda for several months with her nurse. And so that's where she went to that island. And it was a much calmer environment for her. She managed that well. And she liked to write, so she would write back to her mother, well, what's she going to write? I'm so sick, I can't eat anything. I mean, it's just terrible. No, she focused on the good things. And this is a wonderful book to read if you could ever get a copy of it, The Fight to Survive. Carolyn Cox wrote this book about Elizabeth Hughes. And in this book, she tells about her writing, and she says she might have been writing cheerful letters because that was what she wanted to receive. She kept her letters focused on the positive and downplayed the inconvenience of her condition. It's also possible that with her upbeat tone, she was just trying to think positively. And the way she put it is that they were mostly an upbeat recounting of her days. That's what she wrote to her mom. Of course, that was encouraging to her mom, and it was meant to be encouraging to her too. This is what she looked like after coming to Dr. Banting and receiving insulin. And of course, you can see that she went from in 45 pounds. Can you see that? 45 pounds. And that's August. And by January, she was 105. She had more than doubled her weight. And so someone said, hey, insulin causes you to gain weight. Yeah, it does. And you've got to use it in the proper way. Yeah, that was in the proper way for her. But she was in 1918, when she was diagnosed, she was 75 pounds. She started taking 400 to 600 calories per day. I'm not advocating this for anyone, by the way. This is just showing the kind of attitude that she had. She hardly ever showed any sugar, and when Banting examined her on the 16th of August, 3 days from her 15th birthday, she was 45 pounds. 45. And when she was given that insulin, she described it in this way. Oh, it is simply too wonderful for words, this stuff. Isn't that unspeakably wonderful? Well, I think she had the right kind of attitude. And we don't want to see things in a blur. We want to see things in their beauty, don't we, in this life? And so here's a proverb that says, a cheerful look brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to your body. So I want to give you not this blur, but a beautiful picture of how you can feel and deal with your diabetes and your health. These are two books where I've gotten a lot of information right here: Insulin Resistance Solution and Glucose Revolution. And so we see here, the first thing is that timing sequence of eating protein and carbs. Eat protein first. Well, what difference does that make? You've got to be kidding. Well, there's a wisdom principle that says finish your outdoor work and get your fields ready. After that, build your house. Do you see a sequence there? You could build a house and then end up starving to death in it, couldn't you? You got to get the fields ready. And so on this picture, what should you eat first? What would you suppose that you would eat first in that picture there? The spuds, the potatoes and gravy? The vegetables. I would start with the green beans. Then I might go to the protein. Then I might come back to the carrots, because there's a little bit more carbs in that, just a little bit. And the final thing, the very last thing I would eat is the potatoes there. So eating fewer carbs decreases insulin levels and brings fewer glucose spikes. So what can we do? Well, we can eat less carbs. And research studies have found that eating quickly also raises the blood sugar level. So eat slowly too when you eat. So the first thing to do is eat carbs last. That's how you disarm carbohydrates. You eat them last. And with high levels of insulin and insulin resistance, leptin, which is the hormone that tells you, hey, I'm full. Well, that signal is blocked, and ghrelin, the hormone that tells us we're hungry, takes over. And so even though we have fat reserves with lots of energy available, our body tells us that we need more, so we eat. And as we eat, we experience more glucose spikes and insulin rushes in the store excess glucose as fat, increasing the action of ghrelin. And the more weight we put on, the hungrier we get. And it's important. It's a vicious cycle that takes place. The place to start is to eat carbs last and eat less of them. And so here's an example. These are wonderful because they've got a lot of fiber in them. And especially eating berries. Berries are really low in the glycemic index, and they're one of the best things to eat as far as fruit goes. But what is fruit? Is it a carbohydrate? Are we going to sit down and have a little bowl of fruit the first thing that we eat? Or is that going to be the last as a dessert? That's what it should be, the last. Now, if you were to have cereal, I've had Rice Krispies, it doubled my blood sugar level, doubled it. Researchers at Stanford University did a study on continuous glucose monitoring. In 2018, they did something that all great scientists do. They challenged assumptions. And the results of this study were alarming. In those healthy individuals, a bowl of cereal sent their glucose levels into a zone of deregulation thought to be attained only by people with diabetes. 16 of the 20 participants experienced a glucose spike above 140, and the rest of them experienced over 200, which is like type 2. And this tells us to avoid dry cereals like Cheerios and Rice Krispies to maintain good blood glucose control. So don't have that for breakfast. That's a good way to start off bad in the day. Carbohydrates raise blood sugar, but if you tell someone not to eat them or to drastically cut back, it's hard for them to comply, says that doctor at Cornell University. Not to eat them or to drastically cut back. He says it's very difficult. This study points to an easier way that patients might lower their blood sugar and insulin levels. And that way is to focus on how much and when carbohydrates are eaten. These 11 people were overweight on metformin, type 2, The meal consisted of carbohydrates, protein, vegetables, and fat. And so they started off with this study, let's eat the carbohydrates first, and then wait 15 minutes and have the protein and vegetables and fiber and all that. And then they did the reverse. And this, over a period of time, they did this, and they did some tests. And the post-meal glucose levels were checked at 30, 60, and 2 hours. Much lower at the 30, 60, and 120-minute checks by about 29%, 37%, and 17%. Well, what did it? It was eating the carbs last. That's what did it. And so the idea is eat your carbs last. Eat all the vegetables and all the meat and just set that carb aside and eat that later. And of course, eat less carbs to start with. Since carbohydrates directly affect blood glucose levels, the less you eat, the better your blood glucose control will be. So what is the ideal amount of carbohydrates to eat per day? Well, some advocates of a low-carb meal plan, they really mean low-carb, because some suggest up to 12 to 15 grams of carbs per meal. That equals about a piece of bread, doesn't it? That's it. That's it. And so for the day, they would eat 50 grams. And, if you can do that, do that. But if you can eat more and still maintain good blood glucose and lose weight, do that. And so I eat about 90 to 110 instead of 50 a day. That's 27% of my body weight. And there's another thing to do. Now, by the way, how many carbs do you see on that plate? Not too many. I mean, you get a little bit but you get a lot of fiber in these vegetables. There's very little carb there. So eat the fiber first, like veggies and meat, because carbohydrates drive up the blood sugar. And so, in other words, the Cornell University study revealed that if you eat a meal containing starch, fiber, sugar, protein, and fat in a specific order, you reduce your overall glucose spike by 73%, as well as your insulin spike by 48%. And this is true for anyone with or without diabetes. So what is the correct order? It's fiber first, protein and fat second, and starches and sugars last. And foods containing fat slow gastric emptying, so eating them before rather than after carbs also helps flatten out glucose curves. And the takeaway, eating carbs with everything else is the best. Eating carbs after everything else is the best sequence. So on this plate, eat your what? What are you going to eat last on that plate? Yeah, the potatoes. You're going to eat that, probably try to eat most of that, then some of that, then go to the potatoes. And according to the book Glucose Revolution, if we compare two meals containing the same number of calories, but the one with fewer carbs will lead to a smaller glucose spike and will keep you feeling full for longer, and high insulin levels add to the feeling of constant hunger. And when a lot of insulin is in our body, with insulin resistance built up over years of glucose spikes, our hormones get mixed up. And so studies have suggested that hyperinsulinemia can potentially cause leptin resistance, which I already talked about, the feel full hormone, and ignite the ghrelin, the feel hungry hormone. And so you can see, again, that's a good plate, isn't it, of food. Lots of fiber, lots of protein there. Now, when you look at protein, that is fiber, when you look at fiber, it's under the carbohydrates. Do you see that? Under the carbohydrate? There's 6 grams of fiber. Total carbohydrates of 28 grams, but 6 of them are that, so you subtract it, because the body has a hard time breaking it down and using it. And so that's really helpful to know that. What are the benefits of fiber? Well, the glucose book, The Glucose Revolution, lists 3 superpowers of fibers. First is it reduces the action of the enzyme that breaks starch down into glucose molecules, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Second, it slows down stomach emptying, and when fiber is present, food moves more slowly. Finally, it creates a dense mesh in the small intestine, making it harder for glucose to reach the bloodstream. And through these mechanisms, fiber slows down the breakdown and absorption of any glucose that lands in the stomach after it. The result is that fiber flattens our glucose curves. Let me add that this is especially true of soluble fiber, which dissolves in water, becomes a gummy gel, and helps blunt elevated blood glucose after a meal. And so let me repeat this point from the Glucose Revolution about fiber's benefits. Fiber is also good for our glucose levels for several reasons, notably because it creates a dense mesh in our intestine. The mesh slows down and reduces the absorption of molecules from food across the intestinal lining. And what does this mean for our glucose curves? First, that we absorb fewer calories. And second, with fiber in our system, any absorption of glucose or fructose molecules is lessened. Now, there's a proverb. I like this proverb. Better to have a dish of vegetables where there's love than a juicy steak where there's hate. Well, most people find a delicious steak meal satisfying to the taste, but if you're eating with people who don't like you, it's not that tasteful. But whereas eating a meal with those who love is pictured with vegetables. And guess what? As we've been looking, vegetables are good for us. So it's kind of a subtle message here about the benefits of vegetables. And what are vegetables? Well, they're very beneficial for health. So start a meal with a green starter. What qualifies as a green starter for a meal? Salad, sure. You could, like we've been seeing the plates, the green starters or anything green on there, Brussels sprouts. Well, you could even take turnips. Lots of fiber in them there. And of course, broccoli. Dr. Axe says this about broccoli, which is a green starter for a meal. Broccoli was first cultivated as an edible crop in the northern Mediterranean region, starting in about the 6th century BC. And as far back as the Roman Empire, it's been considered a uniquely valuable food when it comes to promoting health and longevity. And believe it or not, it didn't actually become widely known in the U.S. until the 1920s, which is surprising if you consider how popular it is today. Is it popular? It is with me. Is it with you? I hope you like it. You can't eat it? Okay, don't eat turnip greens. Can you have turnip greens? Or how about turnips? Maybe turnips. I'll let you decide. Why is broccoli good for dieters? It's one of the most nutrient-dense foods on earth. And 1 cup of the cooked veggie has just over 50 calories, but a good dose of fiber, so you subtract that. And protein and detoxifying photochemicals, which reduce inflammation. Is broccoli a carb? It's a complex carbohydrate, high in fiber. It is a great choice for supporting balancing blood sugar levels, ongoing energy, and helping you feel full. You want to know a secret to losing weight fast? Including more high-volume, low-calorie, high-nutrient foods in your meals is key. And broccoli fits it to the T. High water content. And it really fills up your stomach. And so when you think about whole foods, that's what it is. It's a whole food. The difference between an apple and an apple juice is the difference between a whole food and what isn't. The way to have fruit is in its whole state, with all the nutrients still there. Plus, in the whole state, foods are much more filling. Healthy whole foods are naturally loaded with fiber, vitamins, and minerals, and some are antioxidants that protect cells against damage. And whole foods are the state of rich, nutrient-dense foods. They have no added sugars and fats and exclude added salt or other high-sodium ingredients. That's the difference between a whole food and what's not. The apple and the juice. Now, if you already have food in your stomach, when you eat a carbohydrate, the carbohydrate will be diluted by the other foods and pass into your intestine more slowly than if you consumed it on an empty stomach. The muscles in your stomach walls, they squeeze, they massage its contents, mixing food with digestive juices until it turns into a thick liquid ready for passage into your intestine. And so substances that resist liquefaction, such as fiber in fruits and vegetables or the gristle in meat, slow down this process. Mushy food gets digested faster than crispy foods do. So slow down carb absorption by including foods such as meat and vegetables that resist this liquefaction of meals. Only eating starch or sugar with other foods, never on an empty stomach. It'll just go drive up blood sugars. So your digestive tract's like a conveyor belt in a factory. And you put the raw material in one end, and different parts of your digestive system, they work on it as it travels along the route. If you understand what happens at each stage of digestion, you will see several points at which you can slow the process, according to Dr. Rob Thompson. And so here's one of them. Eat cheese and or nuts 15 minutes before a meal. How many of you have tried that? Only me, because I read about it. But here's the idea. When your intestine senses that it has as much food as it can handle, it sends a message to your pyloric valve to tighten up and slow the passage of food into your intestine. And it turns out that you actually have some control over your pyloric valve, and it provides a way for you to absorb carbohydrates but also control your appetite. You can see where it is right there. A muscular ring called the pyloric sphincter functions as a valve that opens and closes the outlet of your stomach. It regulates the speed with which food leaves your stomach and passes into your intestine. And the most potent stimulator of your pyloric valve is the presence of fat in your intestine. Now, why did I say eat cheese or nuts 15 minutes before? You've already got the fat going through the process. As soon as fat passes through the pyloric valve and reaches your intestine, it activates a reflex that closes the pyloric valve, which keeps food from exiting the stomach. It doesn't take much fat to do this. Scientists have found that as little as 2 teaspoons of fat before a meal will slow stomach emptying. And if you eat a fatty snack, a piece of cheese, or a handful of nuts 10 to 15 minutes before a meal, it will close the pyloric valve. It'll help close it. Not all the way. But when you sit down to eat, you will still have plenty of room in your stomach to enjoy your meal. However, because the tightened pyloric valve slows the passage of food out of your stomach, it takes less food to fill you up, and you'll ultimately end up eating less. So eat some cheese and nuts 15 minutes before a meal for this to happen. So does everyone have some cheese that they could use? Some good old sharp cheese or whatever kind of cheese you want. Or some nuts. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, do that. That sounds like a good idea. Here's another idea. Eat food like pasta al dente, that is, undercook it. Okay? If you prepare food al dente or slightly undercooked like pasta, so it's more chunky, when you swallow it, it'll take longer to digest and raise your blood sugar less that way. And then here's another one. Eat a salad with vinegar first, like, well, Italian dressing has vinegar in it, okay? Why eat a salad? Well, your intestinal cells, they can't absorb starch. It has to be broken down into individual glucose molecules, which can pass through the walls of your intestine and into your bloodstream. Your intestine relies on one enzyme to do this, and that's amylase. And it's the dissembler of starch. It unhitches glucose molecules from each other and frees them up so that they can be absorbed. But vinegar inhibits amylase and has been proven to slow the absorption of starch in humans. It's been used for centuries to treat diabetes. And studies show that 2 tablespoons consumed before eating starch lowers the after-meal glucose and reduces demands for insulin. Vinegar doesn't have to be consumed straight. It can be sprinkled on food as a condiment, or a common practice in Mediterranean countries. That's what it's common practice there. Or it's used as a salad dressing, and be sure to get the cans. That's my name. Okay. And so this person is starting her meal with a salad with a vinegar-based dressing, a vinaigrette of some sort. And sprinkling vinegar on your salad, even if the dressing isn't vinegar-based, using vinegar as a condiment. Include a pickle with your meal because you're going to get some vinegar there. So that's good. So we're going to disarm the carbs by eating carbs last, eat fewer carbs, eat fiber first, which is actually a carbohydrate, but it's a fiber, and that's in veggies, and eat protein, meat. Eat cheese and or nuts 15 minutes before a meal, and eat food like pasta al dente, undercooked. Eat salad with vinegar first, and then what are you going to do? After you've gotten through eating, what are you going to do? Does someone know? Huh? Walk after eating. There you have it. And so, these are pictures from the 1920s to the 1950s, office workers. People dressed up at the office. They wore suits. They weren't doing physical work. But what catches my eye in this is the same thing that probably catches your eye. Do you see them? You see these people? What do you think's unusual about them? Not that they're dressed up, but, huh? They're thin. There's no overweight people there, really. Now, Paul, let's don't be bringing that up. They might have been, but we don't know. And then here's some women. Man. Same situation with women office workers. What's the difference between them and today? They ate plenty of bread and potatoes. Evidence suggests that the average caloric intake then was actually higher than it is now. And they didn't exercise in gyms. The only difference is that most people who worked in offices did a lot more walking than they do today. That's it. Now, here's an additional benefit from walking. Walking reduces insulin levels and makes your muscles more sensitive to insulin. And it takes tremendous exercise to burn 70 calories, the amount in a slice of bread. So that's not why exercise brings benefits like better health. Instead, it cuts back on insulin resistance. And when you take a walk for a few minutes, your body becomes more sensitive to insulin for the time that you're walking and up to the following 48 hours. So you need less insulin. You help cut back on insulin resistance. Now, how long can you breathe before becoming fatigued from breathing? Have you ever thought about that? As you read this, you're still breathing. You're not reading it, but I am. And you aren't exhausted. And that's because of an abundance of mitochondria in the muscle cells. Mitochondria. And in all these cells, not every cell, but you have mitochondria. You kind of see them there. Mitochondria are tiny energy producers. The muscles with the most mitochondria, like the heart, have a slow contraction speed and slow twitch conduction, not fast like your hand muscles have. You can exhaust your hand muscles by using them too much. Your breathing muscles activity is an aerobic because the mitochondria aid the cells as tiny energy producers, providing oxygen and fatigue resistance. Your heart, your breathing, you don't get fatigued from doing that. You don't tend to, that is. And so, when you start walking, the leg muscles do not fatigue because they are abundant with mitochondria. When you walk, there is a response for less insulin needed, which can last for up to 48 hours, and insulin resistance reverses and blood sugar comes down. So after eating a meal, take a walk. And you've got a lot of those mitochondria in your leg muscles. So you shouldn't get exhausted in your legs, okay, with a walk. If you sit after a meal, their blood sugar peaks like a mountain for about 2 hours. If, however, people take a 15-minute walk at 1 mile per hour after a meal, the mountains become safe, gentle, rolling hills. With a 1 mile per hour walk after a meal, blood sugar peaks are halved. So if your blood sugar was going to go up 100 points after a meal, it would only go up 50 points, just because of the factor of the walk there. Not adding all the other things we've talked about. And so when you eat the vegetables when? First. Eat your protein when? Yeah. Eat your carbohydrates last. The author of Glucose Revolution writes, the slower the trickling of glucose into your bloodstream, the flatter our glucose curves, and the better we feel. We can eat exactly the same thing, but by eating carbs last, we make a big difference in our physical and mental well-being. And what's more, when we eat foods in the right order, our pancreas produces less insulin. And less insulin helps us return to fat-burning mode more quickly, the positive results of which are many and include losing weight. So I want to just give you one more little detail here so that you can see clearly. That's a kind of a pretty picture, isn't it? There. Is it still pretty? What happened? This is what a person who's got color blindness experiences. You take away the beauty, the reds, all of that, pink, just kind of disappears. And there's different shades of it and all of that. That would be kind of devastating, really, when you think about it, to not be able to see everything in rich colors. Of course, you get cataracts, you experience that, but you can have cataracts removed. Here's a boy that had color blindness, and his principal was teaching the class that day. He had color blindness. He had these glasses that he got that took away the color blindness. And I want to give you this as a little example here. Okay, and
in there too. That is so awesome. I told you it's going to be a little emotional. Hey, now that just tells you how beautiful of a world you have. John and I got to see it for the first time, right? So be happy, be appreciative of it. Right?
Those are the special glasses he's got on there.
That is so cool. John, when I said I touched them, don't you want to touch them? I wanted to touch every color, right? Go ahead, you can touch them.
Look at the safety. Down. No, down. John, right there in the middle. Take them off.
Isn't that cool? Huh?
He was seeing colors for the first time. I want everyone to be able to see the colors. Disarm carbohydrates. Eat your carbs last. Eat fewer carbs. Eat your fiber, your vegetables, your meat, your protein first. Eat cheese and nuts 15 minutes before. I don't mean make a great big meal out of them either. Just a little bit, yeah. And eat food like pasta, al dente, undercooked. Eat salad with vinegar first. And after you do all of that, what do? Walk. Enjoy your walk. So that's it. And I hope that you've gotten some ideas that you can put in practice tonight. Put them into practice. And I think it'll make a difference in blood sugar levels and how you feel there. So that's going to be it. Now I've got all this material in my new book. I've got a second edition coming out. And I've got all the information that I went over tonight in the new book, and with many more things. And so I think it's going to be a real improvement on the book, The 17 Wise Ways. And I'll have one for everyone for Christmas. Okay? Yeah. Maybe Thanksgiving, but I'll say Christmas. So it's good to see everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Yeah. The what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the different kind of pastas you can get. Oh, good. Chickpea, that's good. It's good. Okay. David, take care now. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Glad you came. Now be sure and put your telephone number down.
Ken, I'm curious.
Just by using the restroom.
Oh, gotcha.
The nuts and cheese thing.
Yeah.
Could you make use almond flour to make crackers and eat the crackers with cheese? Would that
I
have
don't
the same
know.
effect?
I doubt it, because you're wanting fat, aren't you? Are you going to get enough fat out of that?
Well, the almond flour is ground up almonds.
I think someone in your house would probably prefer the nuts and cheese.
Well, he likes egg salad and tuna salad, and I just thought if I made the little crackers.
Well, you could try it. Sure. I mean, if you're willing to do that, go to that trouble to do that.
See you next time. Have a good evening.
Yeah.